Welcome to Proudly Jewish Conversations on Israel and Jewish Identity. I'm Cantor Eyal Biton from Congregation Neve Shalom in Portland, Oregon, and my very special guest today is Ben M. Freeman. Ben M. Freeman is the founder of the modern Jewish Pride movement. He's an internationally renowned author, an educator whose work focuses on Jewish identity, combating Jew hatred, and raising awareness of the Holocaust. He is one of his generation's most influential voices against anti-Jewish racism. He's also the author of the highly influential and important work, Jewish Pride, Rebuilding a People. I encourage everyone to read this. And the sequel, Reclaiming Our Story, The Pursuit of Jewish Pride. And he's currently completing the final installment of this trilogy called The Jews, an Indigenous People. Ben speaks and consults globally, working with diverse organizations from Netflix to the World Jewish Congress. Ben, welcome to Proudly Jewish.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, truly.
That is so wonderful to hear. Let's get right into some of these questions that I have for you. Well, first, let me say, you were in many ways my inspiration for creating this podcast. Okay, the movement you founded, like the first book you wrote, is entitled Jewish Pride. And this podcast is entitled Proudly Jewish. It's not a coincidence. I was trying to echo your teaching and your teachings and your approach to things. Now, let's get into this idea of Jewish pride. When I speak to people in my community or anywhere else, Jews, I mean, about having Jewish pride, everyone thinks they have it. Of course, I'm proud of being Jewish. Of course. And they'll say, well, for some people, it's Jewish values such as Tikkun Olam. I'm very proud of Tikkun Olam or this or that value. And some think Jewish pride is being proud of Jewish religious practice, going to synagogue, putting on tefillin, etc. Can you tell us what Jewish pride is exactly? What do you mean by it?
So there's three. So firstly, again, thank you for having me. And I love that you've asked this question. And if you'd have spoken to me, the first book came out 3 years ago. And my thoughts and ideas have evolved somewhat. So the three kind of main tenets that I will talk about, and then I'll talk about really my more kind of nuanced idea of it, is that Jews should see their Jewishness as a source of pride and never shame, number one. So it's pretty broad. The second, also broad, is that Jews will define Jewish identity themselves and will reject non-Jewish definitions of what it means to be a Jew. And number three, Jews will begin an exploration of Jewishness to gain an understanding of Jewish identity, but through a Jewish lens. And I think that the first two are still really relevant, but the final point I think is perhaps really important also. And it's the idea that really Jewish pride is a journey, and probably a journey without an end. And hopefully what it does, this movement, this work, gives people the skills and tools to engage in a journey of exploration and introspection about their own Jewish identities. So we need to have it collectively as a people, but also as individuals. We have to ask ourselves questions such as, how do I really feel about my Jewishness? How do I really feel about Israel? And understand and be able to engage with those questions with empathy, without shame, without judgment. But then also, speaking to this exploration, we have to be able to understand what it means to be a Jew. And I'm not sitting here with all the answers, but we have to go on a journey to explore that. But the most important point in that is that we're utilizing a Jewish perspective when we go on that journey. And I'm, finishing the book at the moment, the third book, and I'm on the last chapter. And I said to him, I have a mentor who is actually featured in the book as an interview, and I call him my Dumbledore. And I said to him, yesterday on the phone, I was like, I can feel my new obsession percolating. And he was like, uh-oh, what's that? And I was like, it's really about Judaism, the religion, actually. It's about how we frame Judaism as a religion. So using Jewish ideas or non-Jewish ideas to understand ourselves. This can be an example. Often Jews in the diaspora understand Judaism through a Protestant lens.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, what they do, and we do, as I'm a Jew in the diaspora and I'm a secular Jew, is we utilize the Protestant idea that you can kind of categorize and separate religion from the rest of your life. That's not Jewish. That is not the way Jewishness was constructed. It was not the way Jewishness evolved. It's not the way that Judaism evolved. It was really the first mention of the word Judaism is in the second book of Maccabees,
Mm.
and it was really in reference to Jewishness, like, and used in opposition to Greekness,
Okay.
which is more than just religion. It's about religion and law and society and governance and politics and culture and action, all of these things. So to separate it and say, well, religion's over here and Judaism's over here and this is all over here. No,
Mhm.
that's not authentic. It's not an accurate understanding of what it means to be a Jew. Now, I'm secular, and in the Jewish context, that would mean that the divine is not a part of the Jewish relationship,
Okay.
your Jewish relationship. But the divine is always there because that's what it means to be a Jew, right? We say the Shema. Secular Jews still say the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. We are still declaring that there is one God for the Jewish people.
Mhm.
So it's about understanding the complexity and the nuance. Whereas if you're an atheist in the kind of Protestant world and you say that God doesn't exist, then there's not even the conception that there is a God. Even if you're a secular Jew, you still recognize that there is an idea of a God, which is very different. So this was long and probably a little complicated, but it's about utilizing the Jewish perspective, diving into our history, our experience, and setting aside the non-Jewish world, and especially the Christian world, and their kind of a mental colonization of us as Jews.
Oh, I love that. The mental colonization. Wow. Yeah. It it sounds obvious in some ways. Okay,
Yeah,
we'll look
100%.
at everything through a Jewish lens, but
So
we don't live in a vacuum. We're influenced by
yeah,
the world around us, you know.
100%.
Um,
Absolutely.
okay, let me go to. I'm sure some of these ideas are things we're going to come back to in this podcast. Let's talk about October 7th and anti-Semitism for a moment. Um, so much of the Jewish world, certainly here in the States, and I know the rest of the world, but certainly here, has been absolutely shocked uh, by the anti-Semitism that has erupted since October 7th.
Mm.
You tweeted back on June 24th, 2020,
Oh,
the
wow.
following. For years, levels of anti-Semitism have been rising, but it isn't rising anymore. It's risen.
Mm.
The post-Holocaust golden age of Jewry is over, and we must recognize this. Anti-Semitism poses a real threat to us, and no amount of pretending otherwise will protect us. We must wake up. This was your tweet in 2020, in the summer of 2020, almost the summer. Yeah, summer. Can you talk to us about this change and how it started well before October 7th?
Yeah.
Did, and go ahead.
Well, I think you're exactly right. It started well before October 7th. I think that it's been percolating for a long time. I'm 37, so I was at university. I started university 19 years ago at Glasgow University in Scotland. And there was a lot of anti-Semitism there, and particularly from the left. But it still felt like it was the more extremes of the political spectrum, right? Glasgow was a very left-wing city. The university was very left-wing, so it was a little bit more far left. It wasn't soft left, wasn't progressive. In the UK, I would describe progressive as being soft left. Like
Okay.
if you're a progressive, I know that's slightly different in America, but that's how I would utilize it. And then over time, we started to see the mainstreaming of anti-Semitism. And I think it really took on a new face with Jeremy Corbyn, he was the reason I joined Twitter in 2018.
Okay.
And he became leader of the Labour Party in September 2015 and was immensely popular. I think he spoke at Glastonbury or something crazy. Like it was it was really a cult. It was like really obsessed with his cult of personality, which is not, we had it with Blair and Thatcher to an extent, but it's not very British. That's quite American
Mm.
to be so obsessed with your political leader. But anyway, he became immensely popular, and what he did was he gave permission to all of the people who felt like him to start speaking about it, because there was someone who was in a position of power doing the same thing, and all of these stories were coming out about his perspectives and his previous actions. And then we saw how he responded to them, and it was with great disdain, and he thought that we were these like annoying gnats almost, like get away,
Mm.
like leave me alone, like buzzing us off. And that I think was the mainstreaming. And I remember saying on Twitter, America, this is coming for you, because Corbyn was both a cause and a symptom. He was a symptom of left-wing anti-Semitism, right? He was an expression of that. But by being in this position of power, as I said, he gave permission, he unleashed the beast. And that is what we're dealing with now. The Bernie Sanders, the kind of the squad, the fact that we're still dealing with this in the UK is really his leadership. It's not necessarily to say that he's responsible, but his leadership and his position, I think, is played a huge part in this. And yeah, and in 2020, would I believe we are where we are now? No, it's got even worse than I thought it would in 2020. But that's the lesson. We have to wake up and be, I'm a great lover of Harry Potter, and I'm that age, I'm a millennial, and I love it so much. I like to utilize it in my teaching. And one of the things I think which is relevant was a quote from a character in the fourth book who's called Mad-Eye Moody, and he says you have to have constant vigilance.
Mm.
And it's not necessarily a very nice or a very relaxed way to live in the world, which is why Israel is so wonderful. But yeah, if we're going to be in the diaspora, we better wake up, we better have our eyes open, and we better be vigilant all the time. Because when we kind of get a little relaxed, when we think we're fine, it seems to be that that's when things kick off again.
And so vigilance also assumes that there's hope. And there are so many times where I look around, I see anti-Israel teachings that are false, that have actual falsehoods, historical falsehoods entering the curriculum of elementary school and high school here in the States. And I feel that at times, it's getting quite worse. Is it too late? It looks like our streets are on fire in places. France is not a safe place for Jews. The UK is not a safe place for Jews. I'm speaking in generalities.
Yeah, for sure.
And more places for the US are becoming unsafe. And certainly, look, I marched in Gay Pride March Sunday 2 days ago here in Portland, Oregon, with the Jewish community. None of us were wearing Israeli symbols. For a reason.
Yeah, I mean, in Pride in London was July 1st, and the Jewish organizations didn't march. We had a private party basically at an Israeli restaurant.
I see.
And it was super fun and great, and it felt wonderful. But yeah, it wasn't safe. Is there hope? It's depending which perspective you're talking from. If we're talking about the continuation of the Jewish people, absolutely. We've survived worse than this. We will survive. We will prevail. Whether life continues in the diaspora in the way that it has, no, it won't. Even in terms of the United States, I think Jewish political power has declined enormously and will continue to decline. In Britain, we never really had it in the same way. We certainly had more than Europe, but ours has also, I think, it's become more challenging here. I think there will always be Jews who want to live in the diaspora.
Yeah.
And I think that's their right. But again, it's about doing it with eyes wide open. And I think that what we have to understand is probably that things will get better at some point, but they won't stay better. And this is we have to wake up to we have to start taking bird's eye views, the longue durée, understanding the phrase like mitachat l'shamayim, right? I know it's a religious phrase, but it's actually, that's the perspective we need to have, looking from above down, spotting the patterns. And I think that, if I may, as a non-American, was maybe an error within the American Jewish community, was thinking, we've made it. We're fine. And it's like, yeah, but you're still Jews, and we have to understand the global Jewish experience, and we can hope that, and be like, yes, we hope that we're fine, but you also have to have one eye open. So whether there's hope, I think we're going to see, of course, increased aliyah.
Yes. I
think I personally, I want to make aliyah. I love Israel. I'm going actually on Shabbat, for a vacation for a week. So I'm thrilled and so excited. And when I talk with my partner, we lived in Hong Kong, so we lived as expats. And I think when you do, your perspective on home changes. Israel's my home, but then Hong Kong's my home, London's my home. And we always talk about where next.
Yeah.
And America is definitely an option, but I always say a lot of these, anywhere else in the diaspora feels like a lateral move.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that's smart. Listen, I think that it's I wrote a column maybe in June And it was really the question of when do we leave? And the
Wow.
answer was, I don't know. And that is, I have, I was a Holocaust educator, but I have greater empathy for the Jews in Germany and Austria and in Europe at that time in the 30s. It's a huge decision to uproot your life, to go to somewhere else, to, you may not speak the language. Like, I want to make Aliyah. My Hebrew is kind of conversational at best. It would be enormously challenging. And it's maybe against human nature to want to uproot yourself. You want to have hope. You want to have your heads in the sand. I think it's okay to stay. And I'm not really answering your question about whether there's hope. I think it's okay to stay, but we have to be awake. And then if we're awake, we have to take precautions, i.e. in the UK, every Jewish building, every Jewish school has guards outside.
Yeah.
That's not a nice way to live, but if we want to live here, it's what we have to do. But I also think alongside that reality, we always have to have this dialogue. And in that column, I wrote about the humiliation. And it makes me so angry that people say we have to fight to be in the diaspora. Excuse me. I have a British passport. I
Mm.
watched the coronation. I'm a monarchist. I voted. I pay tax. I am British. I'm a Jew, but I'm also British, and I'm also British.
Yes.
So the idea that I have to fight to remain in the country that I was born feels like an enormous humiliation. And then that speaks to Jewish pride. We need to know that we deserve better. If
Mm.
we're going to stay here, fine, but understand the rules of engagement, understand what that looks like, be vigilant, take the precautions, and have some self-esteem. We're not going to kowtow and beg to be accepted. We'll stay here because we can still make lives here, i.e. the diaspora, but we're not going to beg. And
Yeah.
even if we do leave, we're going to leave with our heads held high.
So this is the pride that I think that you're tapping into now, that I think that many people miss when they talk about Jewish pride. And
Yeah.
I heard you once on, I think it was an audio podcast. I don't know if it was a video podcast. I think it was an audio podcast. And you were saying, it was a woman host. And anyway, you were talking about centering the Jewish experience,
Yeah,
centering ourselves.
I know this one.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
And the host was a little uncomfortable with that.
yeah, yeah,
And you said, look, other communities talk
yeah.
about what's most important for the interest of that community, and they don't go, well, what about the rest of this group and that group? And
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we don't do that.
No.
Can you talk a bit about that if you want?
Yeah, I mean it's funny because I'm a human being. I'm not perfect. I don't always have my like professional hat on. And when I don't, and if I'm being glib, I would
Right.
say, yeah, it's really pathetic. Like,
Yeah.
grow up. It's
Mm.
pathetic that we are a community that has survived 3,000 years and all we are concerned about is other people. Grow
Mm.
up. When I have my more professional hat on and I'm thinking about internalized anti-Semitism and the psychology, I understand it. I do understand it. We are so desperate to be accepted. We are so we have been told by the non-Jewish world how you are either a good Jew or a bad Jew, how you're palatable. And we all want to be palatable. We all want to be accepted. We want to survive. And we have to understand that it is a survival technique. But yes, I remember that very specifically. And I thought it was, and I remember exactly what I said. It's like the gay community center themselves. And the interviewer said, it sounds very like we,
Yes.
or me. And I
Right.
said, the gay community is me. The Black community is me, as they should be.
Right.
We have to remember that we're part of the greater polity and that we're part of civic society. But yeah, I'm going to be thinking about Jewish people and how I vote. I'm going to be thinking about Jewish people and where I donate money because we're allowed to be. And the notion that we are not, or the notion that it's unacceptable to be me, or we, is it's actually self-defeating.
Yeah.
It's not just a little pathetic and a little immature and ignorant, it's self-defeating. And while it may be a survival mechanism, it's not going to help you survive. We need to understand who we are. We need to fight back. We're not begging. And it's okay to stay in the diaspora. But this idea that we're not allowed to organize around ourselves and center ourselves in our own stories is, I mean, honestly, it's like the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
No.
I have empathy for that position, but it's wrong. And I've become, as I've in my old age, and I wrote this book many years ago, and now I'm further on in my intellectual journey, I've become more dogmatic on certain things, and that is wrong. It does
Yeah.
not help us. It doesn't help other communities. We should be allies as we want communities to be allied to us, but they're mutual relationships. It's not that we have to leave everything at the door and say, okay, we're not Jews, we're just your average white person. How can we help you? No, we're a community that has specific needs and wants, and it faces specific issues. So when we support other people, it should be mutually beneficial.
I love this. And I I think that you spoke about it a little differently, but the Jewish experience, we're a diasporic people for 2,000 years,
Yeah.
and you know, rooted in some ways and very unrooted in most ways, I would say, and wandering from nation to nation, land to land, and our safety and well-being was dependent upon the grace of the host country
Yeah.
and leadership.
100%.
And I think that that experience has greatly influenced
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the Jew. And it's
100%.
very, very hard
Yeah.
to change that. You know, and so Israel, I'm jumping to another topic I wanted to talk a little later, but it's here. Our relationship to Israel, you know, to shift to being a people with a land after 2,000 years of not being a people with a land, I don't know that we know how to do this collectively.
Well, I would say I would just query or challenge you on saying we weren't a people with a land. It's not true. I mean, like there
Yes,
were
okay.
always Jews in the land, and we were,
Yes.
you know, the book the reason it's so front of mind is the book I've just written or I'm writing is about this. We were always rooted in the land of Israel, even if we were diasporic. But you're right, it changed. We regained sovereignty. Yeah, I think that that is a challenge for us.
Yeah.
And it's partly, I think, a challenge because there are trends within Jewish intellectual thought, like the debate and the arguing, which is great, but it's also a little like there is truth. There's a lot that we can debate on,
Yeah.
but there is truth. One of them is that we're indigenous to the land of Israel, or you could use a different word. We're native. We come from there. It's our home. It's our homeland. It's our ancient homeland, whichever. That's true. That's historically true. And I think that it's very difficult to undo thousands of years worth of like arguing, and because it's not just that we love an argument. It's like people say 3 Jews, 15 opinions, haha.
Yeah.
No, it's like an actual fundamental part of our identity and how
Yeah.
we express it. And I think that can be challenging. I think that Israel, listen, I think there's another conversation to be had, I'm sure, but I think Israel have made some mistakes with regards to like Haredim and whose Jewishness is Jewishness, right? I think that was a complicated thing. But I think that what we don't understand more than that is the idea of indigeneity, is our relationship with it. Because
Yes.
indigeneity isn't just being from a certain place, right? It's actually, and I had my hair cut today and I was talking about this with my barber. Because, you know, your Anglo-Saxon or your Pict, they're from the UK. Like they're kind
Yeah.
of the native people here.
Right.
The thing about indigeneity is that's a part of it, but the bigger thing maybe is the emotional relationship which exists between the people and the land.
Yeah.
A white British person does not have a deeply emotional relationship with the land of England or Scotland, and maybe to an extent, but not the land itself. We're talking about the soil. When Jews get off the plane, what do? Many of them kiss the ground.
Mm.
Jews in the diaspora are buried with bags of soil from Israel. All of these things we face there when we pray. We celebrate holidays that came from the land. Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, Shavuot all started off as agricultural holidays.
Yeah.
And there's a deep emotional relationship. You know, I was there in Israel last June, and I had not been in a long time because I was in Hong Kong and because of COVID, and I cried touching down.
Yeah.
It felt so amazing. And we have to start having that conversation. And again, utilizing this lens of religion, I think has been, or teaching the Jewish relationship to the land of Israel through the lens of religion has been problematic because it's incomplete. It's the Christian, again, even in the Jewish schools, it's the Christian idea where you can separate it. No, we have to understand the holistic relationship which exists between all Jews and Jewishness and God and Israel, whether you believe or not.
Yeah.
That concept still exists. So there's ways that we need to kind of in some ways go back to the drawing board. But I think that is the thing. How do we talk about Israel? How do we feel about it? And naming it. Because when you name something, it's much easier to dissect.
Yes. Now, how we relate to Israel, for me, I was born with this sense of identity. This is our ancestral homeland. For many, they weren't born with that, and my view is as follows. Let me know what you think. Um, an Irish American on St. Patrick's Day, proud to be Irish.
Yeah, love it.
No one asks him in the 80s, 1980s, hey, what do you think of the IRA bombings on the streets? No one says, I don't know that we should celebrate St. Patrick's Day today. I don't know that you should be proud.
Yeah.
And there's just a general pride in one's heritage. The Italian American has a general pride in his or her heritage about being there, and it's nothing to do with the politics of the place and all that. And I don't think that we're teaching that to our youth or to ourselves.
No, I agree with you, and also we're not permitted it by the wider world because of anti-Semitism. You know, I've got friends in New York who are very dear friends and very politically engaged, and they're not Jewish and they're allies, and they'll talk about what's happening now, and they'll talk about social media, they'll talk about X, Y, or Z, and I say, and 2,000 years of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
We are a part of, I mean, what did Kamala Harris say? You don't fall out of a coconut tree. That's the point she was trying to make, that we are connected to the worlds around us, or the worlds that have been. And I think that we've not been permitted it, and we therefore had to find ways in which we could express it. And, you know, post-Enlightenment, especially post-war in America, it was through this lens of religion. You know, after the war, I found this fact when writing my second book. After the war in the United States, there were three main religions in America: Catholicism, Protestantism, and Judaism.
Oh, okay.
And there was a framing of Judaism. Again, I mentioned this at the beginning of our conversation, a framing of Judaism along these lines of Christianity. And they infiltrate because, exactly as you say, we are impacted. There is cultural exchange. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But we started educating in that way because I think it was the framework in which we were permitted. And again, being out of the land or being denied sovereignty for 2,000 years also can complicate your identity. Exactly everything you said about being at the mercy of the nation in which we live. But yeah, I think that we responded to that. I don't think that Jews, I mean, the 1896, I believe, Pittsburgh Platform did actually reject Israel from the Reform movement. But I think really it's a response to the world around us. It's that we're not separate from it. In the book that I've just written, there's a section that my Dumbledore is reading, and it's about the Maccabees. And I said I found it really hard because, you know, there's now a conversation about whether the Maccabean uprising was really a civil war between the Hellenized Jews and then the Zealots. And it's like, I think there's definitely a part of that, but they were colonized.
Yes.
So there was a greater power, a greater influence there. It's not that you can't divorce it from that. And I think it's the same for us. Like when thinking about exactly what you've just said, and I completely agree with you, to me, it's about understanding why. Why did all these things happen? And then we can correct course. And then we can kind of get back to what is authentic or what is healthier. But I don't know if that's possible without that kind of introspection.
And that's key. When I look around, first of all, in 2021, I thought the Jewish community would wake up after the May Hamas war because of the ensuing outpouring of anti-Semitism, of people being attacked on the streets here. And they didn't, overall. And I thought after October 7th, they would wake up. And I think some have, but I think many organizations, institutions, individuals have not. So, you know, to have that journey that you speak of, you need to be able to see what is happening in the world around us, or perhaps you just need, like you mentioned with the Zealots and, you know, the Maccabee story. Maybe you don't need everyone to; you just need enough to. What do you?
No, I agree. I think it's American Jewry. I don't really believe in American exceptionalism, particularly with regards to Jews. I think it's fair to say that Jews went further there than anywhere else in the world, but it actually has major echoes of Germany in the 19th century and Germany pre-war. And I think that, unfortunately, there will be a segment of Jewish society which doesn't wake up until it's too late, which will always favor the majority and their culture because there are the influences always permeating our sense of self and our worldview. And I think that it's about there being enough. And we are seeing it. I do think that we should have hope. Social media, I literally before this call was speaking to a PhD student who's researching social media and it's kind of how it's used to discuss Jewish identity. And people like to be very to dismiss social media, and it is a cesspit in many ways, but also it has afforded us an unbelievable opportunity. I mean, you and I interacted because of social media,
Right.
and it has given us a means to have conversations, and actually, which I think then intensifies feelings and understandings of Jewish peoplehood. So it's about enough people using their platform, enough people switching on. Not all of the Judeans, as they were referred to then, joined the Maccabees. There was an element of civil war. Some were fighting with the Greeks, and some were fighting, with the Zealots. So there will always be that. We're not a monolith, frustratingly, right? Like, it'd be great if we were, and we could say, okay, this is how we feel about this, wonderful. But so I think that's the way it is, and I think that's okay. Again, it's just about enough of us. But I think the majority, and hopefully it will be the majority who switch on, we have to have very clear boundaries and what are acceptable and also unacceptable conversations. And my perspective on this shifted slightly post October 7th. And I know there's no legal mechanism for it, so don't at me. But it's a cherem. I think we need to make clear to anti-Zionist Jews and the world that this is not a Jewish position. It does not represent the Jewish community. People can make Sivan come back if they wish and if they do the work. But yeah, I think that for those of us who have switched on and are fighting, the tent cannot be so broad. It's broad. That's great. It cannot be so broad that we have ideas included which are antithetical to Jewishness.
And for those who don't
Went off on a
understand,
tangent there, sorry.
I'm the king of tangents. I love tangents. That's how I speak as well.
Great.
But for those who don't know the term cherem, excommunication.
Yeah.
And
It's extreme.
I heard Reform Rabbi Amiel Hirsch in New York speaking on not in person, but I heard him on social media speaking on, I think it was a Devar Torah, a sermon on Shabbat, and he talked about these Jews who have turned against the Jewish people, for lack of a better phrasing, and he said something very critical about them, and then said, "When you're ready to come back, our arms are open. Welcome."
100%.
But
Absolutely.
he made that delineation that you made as well, that you've sort of stepped outside the fold by doing this.
Yeah, and the tent is broad, and ever since Jewish practice became widely adhered to through the prism of law.
Yeah.
So it's not, after it was just things that Jews did, and it was like, we're doing this because it's the law, which Yonatan Adler kind of, that period he puts at the Hasmoneans, basically. That's when the law became widely spread and widely adhered to. There were different interpretations, the Essenes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. It's like, that's what Jews have always been. So I think people get a little afraid and they think, oh, you think it should be a monolith. Absolutely not. You and I, we can have conversations about Israel or many things, and there'd be points we agree on and points we disagree on. Totally fine. But we should be operating from within a boundary. And one of them is that Jews are, in the language I would use, indigenous land of Israel, and we have a right to sovereignty in that land. And that is the state of Israel.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem so intense and so like outrageous that we recognize that a country which does exist has a right to exist. And as a Jewish country that sits, even if you don't want to use the word indigenous, which I encourage you to use, but even if you don't want to, in the historic land of the Jews.
Yes.
If you look at the map of the Hasmoneans, because they were the period after the Kingdom of Judah when the land expanded, it's very similar. It's all very similar to the modern state. So Eretz and it is Medina. There's obviously differences, but you can't. The reason Israel was called Israel was because of the continuity, because of the past, because of the connection that existed. And it's okay to be critical of it. It's okay to hate Benjamin Netanyahu. That's absolutely fine. Many Israelis do. But the Israelis did something so powerful during the protest for the judicial reforms. And whatever your perspective on that is, that even those who were against the reforms came with Israeli flags.
Right.
That's highly unusual for there to be anti-government protests that utilize the flag of the country, because that's often seen as belonging to the government, maybe the right wing.
Yes.
Those people were coming with the flag of Israel. They were singing Hatikva because they love Israel. That's the lesson. Disagree all you want, engage in debate. As we've said, that is a very Jewish practice,
Yeah.
but there are boundaries.
Now, what you just said about the flags is it resonate, I suspect, with many of the viewers that I have here in the States. You know, I live in Portland, Oregon, a very progressive environment. And when you see a vehicle driving, you know, with an American flag, it tends to mean I associate with the Republican Party or something like this.
100%.
And the idea, you know, wouldn't it be fascinating if everyone grabbed that flag and said, no, this is me. This is me.
Yeah, it's the same in the UK. I mean, like during the coronation of the king last year, there were people who said they were triggered, and you're like, sorry, it's the flag. Like, that sucks. But
Right.
it is the flag. That's the flag of the United Kingdom. So yeah, it's going to be flown at the coronation of the king. And I think Israel, it's wonderful. You know, it's my brother always my family live in Israel, my brother and sister, and they're married to Israelis and have Israeli children. And my brother used to always kind of make a joke about my sister-in-law because she's so Zionist.
Yeah.
And he'd be like, she's such a Zionist Israeli. And we're Zionists growing up in the diaspora, but she was in it. She was Israeli and she understood the value of Israel, the importance of it. She loved it. And they're critical. It's not, we have to step away from populism. And it's very difficult to do because it's what's happening right now. I mean, an American election is a very good example of this, but we have to be able to engage in nuance and complexity and shades of gray, and it's not black or white. But saying that, yeah, there should be boundaries. There's certain things which are unacceptable and there's certain things which are acceptable. Sorry.
Yeah. You talk about the value of Israel, and you know, for quite a few Americans, I'm Canadian for those who don't know, but I'm living in the States. So quite a few Americans that I've met, Jewish Americans, October 7th, there's some of them who had virtually no connection or contempt even for Israel. October 7th, for many of them, crystallized their relationship in the sense that, oh, it matters to me now. I see, because a threat, an existential threat to that state is a threat to my well-being as a Jew out here.
Yes,
and,
I agree.
Okay.
I agree very much, very strongly. And I think, and it's, and again, it's part of the indigeneity. It's a recognition that, oh, I was editing this today in the book, that I have a section, the final chapter of my new book, talking about integration. I talk about integration, and all of my work in this one is about indigeneity affords us or grants us permission to be different. We are different. We're not part of the majority. I'm not white British. I would say to the Americans watching this, you're not white American. That's something specific. You're American, but you're American Jews. There's a little hyphen there, and that hyphen indicates another identity.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're accused of dual loyalty. And actually what I say is, I don't have dual loyalty, I have dual connection. I am a Jew and I am British. And as a Jew, and that's an annoying phrase, but as a Jewish person, let's say, I am indigenous to the land of Israel and have an emotional relationship with it. And the modern state sits on that indigenous land and is the Jewish state. And I think a lot of people woke up to that, and also woke up, as I think I said earlier, to the emotional relationship that exists between us and Israel. I lost my father 7.5 years ago, and I have never experienced grief like I did the week after October 7th. Like, it was truly one of the worst weeks of my life. Like, and I think it's immensely traumatic, and there is a before and after October 7th. And I think the reaction that many Jews, not all, but I think the majority of Jews had, was also a wake-up call to this relationship. It's like, oh my God, I care so deeply.
Yeah.
I want to do what I can. I mean, the money that was sent from the diaspora to Israel was not a flippant signing of a check. It was a representation of our connection to the land. And it was I find it so moving. And it's, I'm privileged in that I get to speak to Jewish communities all over the world. And I was in Australia, New Zealand in June. and they had the same reaction that we did, and that you did in America, and that the Canadians did, and the South Africans. And again, not everyone I know, but a lot of people. It was the same. You speak about this emotional response, and people are like, "Yes, I get it," because we're a people, we're a family, we're native indigenous to that land, and there is an emotional tie. So it feels like an assault on our integrity, assault on ourselves. And yes, there is the kind of other aspect, which is, yeah, and threat against Israel is absolutely a threat against us.
Do
So
you
there's that
feel,
too.
yeah, you've spoken about, you just spoke about grief and this trauma that you experienced after October 7th. And I would say that we all,
Yeah.
generally speaking, did, individually and collectively. And when what October 8th came, I think we were robbed of our ability
Yeah.
to grieve because of all the attacks against us. And
Yeah.
I, I feel like we have as people have not been given the space to grieve and process things properly. October 7th, I mean.
No, no, but everything. Think about it. Think about the pogroms
Yeah.
in Russia. Think about the people who left, what they had experienced, what pain they brought with them. The Ethiopian Jews, the Jews from the former Soviet Union, the Sephardic Jews from Spain and Portugal, the Jews from other parts of the Middle East and North Africa. The act of fleeing, the act of exodus is not one without trauma or complication. And yes, the Shoah, and yes, October 7th. It is completely traumatic. And someone said this online today, actually, that we have been exactly what you said. We've been denied the right to grieve. And it wasn't even October 8th. It was on October 7th. And I remember I woke up and I was actually away for the weekend in the Cotswolds, which is a very lovely area of England, with my partner and another couple. And you wake up and you're looking at your phone through one eye,
Yeah.
like, because you're
Yeah.
not really awake yet. And I was like, oh, Israel's been attacked. And the day went on and we started to understand more. And then we started to understand, well, I mean, immediately we understood there will be a rise in anti-Semitism because Israel will respond. This Hamas line of, we didn't expect Israel to respond. It's like, well, then you're idiots of the most epic proportion, because we all knew what was going to happen. You knew you were going to be flattened and blown into smithereens, because don't come for us. And we knew that was going to happen. So we knew that, oh my God, this terrible thing has happened. And it really took a week for us to understand exactly what actually transpired, because it was live.
Yeah.
And then anti-Semitism started, and we knew that it would only get worse. But this is what the world does to us. And I think it speaks to this, I've been thinking about this a lot, the right to be angry. There's a line in Milk, the film about Harvey Milk with Sean Penn. And that film really changed my life. And I think there's an anti-gay legislation that's passed, and they're marching, and he gets on top of a car with a megaphone and he says, I know you're angry, I am angry too. And I think that we should be a little more angry. We don't want to be consumed by it, because that can be a corrosive force. But if it's utilized in the correct way, along with pride, it can be fuel. I'm bloody furious. It is unacceptable the way that we're treated. It's unacceptable that I don't get to go into the city centre of the city that I live in, and the city I pay council tax and tax in, because of anti-Jewish hate marches. Like, that's horrific. We should be angry about that. We should not tolerate what is done to us, because anger can be this fuel, and it's also an indication that we deserve better.
Yeah.
We deserve better than the way we're treated, and it's their problem and not ours. It impacts us, but it's their issue. This is a shame on them. A damning indictment on them has no reflection on us.
That's a central part of your book, your first one, where you talk about anti-Semitism, that it's their problem, but it does affect us greatly.
Yeah,
but that framing seems to be very important you really want us to understand that. Is that because it helps remove the sense of shame, or okay?
It removes shame, and it removes any notion that we're responsible for our own persecution.
Right. We're not culpable for that. This is their fault.
And I think it's a natural human instinct to have introspection and look inside yourself. And in my second book, Reclaiming Our Story, the book about internalized anti-Semitism, I talk about it with regards to how we internally speak about other Jewish communities.
Yeah.
And particularly with regards to secular or reform or progressive Jews, how the Orthodox are spoken about in those spaces. You know, and we saw this in the 19th century, the rhetoric, and this is why I'm so Moses Mendelssohn as an example. Some people love him. I am like not a fan because to me he was a symbol and someone who expressed major internalized anti-Semitism. But him and people like him were saying horrendous things about the Ostjuden, the Eastern European Jews. They were barbaric, they were cloddish, they were uncivilized. Yiddish was disgusting. It was awful. It's like, hold on a second. But what they're doing is very human, and it's trying to understand why. I find the understanding that this is the non-Jewish problem and not ours to be immensely freeing. I'm not looking inside myself or our community to understand why these things happen. And we're not talking about criticism. We're not talking about, get refusal. We're talking about anti-Semitism that is targeted, Jew hatred that is targeted at specific Jewish communities for their actions from within and without. We're not doing that. No, it's the non-Jewish problem. Gay men are not responsible for homophobia. Women are not responsible for misogyny. It goes back to the conversation that you quoted that the interviewer said to me, it's very me, me, me. We judge ourselves by double standards, and we would never do that to other communities.
Do you feel that the Jewish community, by and large, overall, has failed to educate and equip our youth to understand who we are, who they are?
Yes, we have failed in a dramatic fashion, and no one is really. Everyone's running around like headless chickens. I think I spoke about this on Twitter recently, and I talk about it a lot in person. There's a war against the Jews taking place. One of the fronts is the Middle East, Gaza, Hezbollah, Iran. There's another war taking place, and it's a war of ideology and a war of ideas, and it's taking place on social media, college campuses, and the Jewish community is not engaging in that war. We're not fighting back. We're not waging an intellectual war, not just to be defensive. We're not supporting public intellectuals. We're not supporting thinkers who are promoting ideas, who are changing the conversation, who are evolving the conversation, helping people understand ourselves more. We're a community with resources. It is an amazing thing and something that we should be incredibly proud of. And there should be funds dedicated to the creation of curriculum. There should be funds dedicated to the training of educators, to supporting people who are making their life's work the defense of the Jewish people from an intellectual perspective. And we're not doing that. And it is a damning indictment on the donors. And if you're listening, yeah, I'm talking about you and the major legacy organizations. It's unacceptable. And at some point, when we have enough space, history will judge them. Because October 7th has given us an opportunity. Exactly as you said, people have switched on in a way that they haven't in generations. So what are we doing with that?
And
But
right. Now, the title of your first book, Jewish Pride, Rebuilding a People. I think it comes to that. I don't know if you're going to rebuild a people. I think you need to realize that it requires rebuilding, that you're broken.
Absolutely.
Do you think these legacy organizations and these educators are failing, that have not done what you've said, that they haven't stepped up because they don't recognize that? Like, why not? Why don't they step up?
I think some of them don't recognize it. I think some of them don't know what to do. I think some of them are also like businesses and they want to keep their donors coming in. So they, when donors want projects, they're not necessarily wanting to support ideas. There's no leadership. I wrote a column in the Jerusalem Post and said, we need a Jewish war council that is going to be people from all of the different organizations, all of the different countries, and multi-generational to come and get together and look at what is necessary and pull our funds. I will say that people like me are getting paid to do the work on the other side. I make my living through tours. You don't really make any money from books, but that's it, from the tours that I do.
Like
There are
speaking tours, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
Speaking tours. There are people who are getting stipends and salaries to work and think and to churn out ideas. And maybe that's not a model we want to emulate, but I think we are not supporting public intellectuals. Jewish pride is one of the most original ideas. I mean, it's not totally original because it did come from my gay experience, so like original-ish
Mhm.
in years. In years. And I'm still hustling to get people to switch on to it.
Right.
Like the first book came out, what year are we in? 3.5 years?
2024. Yeah.
Yeah, 3.5 years ago. And listen, and when I first published it, I was pretty naive and I thought there'd be a change super quickly. Now I'm like older and wiser a little bit, I hope, and I understand these things take huge amounts of time. But I talk to people, I talk to donors and say, I need to upscale this. It needs to be curriculum, it needs to be taught. But to do that, we need to have that step back and introspection. You know, I spoke at a conference and it was a Jewish organization in New York, and it was a symposium about Jewish pride. And that was great and it was interesting. But they asked the question of whether Jewish pride is the future, which to me is like, it is the future because all you need to do is look at the LGBTQ plus community to see how incredibly transformative it is. So it is number one. But I could sense hostility from some of the people in the room. And I think it's because they were uncomfortable with the me-ness, and I think
Yes.
they were uncomfortable with Israel. And I think we have to be there has to be a community position, and we should not be supporting organizations, to be quite frank, who are preaching anti-Zionism or who are diminishing Israel or decentering it. No, it's enough is enough. But it's like a chain effect. You need the donors, the ones who hold the power, to understand that they need to maybe put their money in different places. There needs to be funds set up to support public intellectuals. I and many of my colleagues in this space have regular conversations thinking, well, how long can I do this work for?
Mhm.
Because I'm 37 years old, I want to buy a house, I want to prepare for my pension, and it's immensely difficult. And I think it's a damning indictment on the community. It's not that everyone deserves a salary, but the people who are doing good work, producing ideas, moving the needle, and we look to the other side, they're so well funded, and
Yeah.
we are losing that battle.
Yeah. I I I almost don't know what to say because I know what you're talking about. I hear
Yeah.
you. When you talked just a few minutes ago about how quickly you thought things might change. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I thought, as I said earlier, after 2021, I thought there would be a wake up,
Yeah.
and there wasn't. And then after this, October 7th,
Yeah.
I thought, okay, now the Jewish community understands um, what really is this conflict is really about,
Yeah.
and how it has an impact on Jews who don't even care about Israel. It has an impact on us and on the Jewish world. And so I thought, okay, we're going to realize very quickly that you have to, as a community, support our allies, even if they come from places that we didn't expect, and reject the people who didn't stand with us.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is collectively, look, in the States, there are evangelicals that have stood with the Jewish community, and it's a very uncomfortable thing for many left-wing Jews to go, oh, they're allies, because they disagree on so many other things socially
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
States. But my answer to that is, um, look, American Jews have no problem telling Israel, make peace with your enemy, find
Yeah.
common
Yeah.
ground. Like find a way to say, hey, I disagree with you, and I deeply appreciate your friendship. So I thought, one, we would kind of, as a community, understand how to foster our friendships, and tell the people who've rejected us, we're not happy with you. And two, we would transform our educational system.
Yeah.
And I
I
don't
mean,
I don't know that.
no, I mean you're right, and I think it takes time, but I'm not really seeing signs of it. I had a friend say to me, quite a high profile friend, say to me in the first week of the war, this is going to change everything. And I said to her, no, it's not.
Wow.
It's the community is it's there will be some people who wake up before it's too late. There are some people who are also stuck in the past, who are passionate, but who don't really get it. The
Yeah.
historic thing, the historic idea, the historic action was Jews need to fight anti-Semitism. I'm like, okay, so how do you do that?
Yeah.
I had a conversation with a very, very prominent legacy org, and they were talking about fighting anti-Semitism. And I was like, how much do you spend on this? And they were like, a lot of money. And I was like, and who does it speak to?
Hmm.
Is it Jews or non-Jews? And they were like, I guess it's primarily Jews. And I was like, well, then you're wasting your money.
Yeah.
And we want to show that we're fighting back. So doing those campaigns is important. But if you want to fight anti-Semitism, you have to speak to the non-Jews, which obviously is a challenge because we don't get in those doors. We don't have seats at those tables, right? If we want the British government to mandate that every school has to educate, not just about the Holocaust, but about the Jewish people and anti-Semitism, then we have to be able to have access to those conversations. And it's immensely difficult. Even if we do have access, it's immensely difficult. So I think that's a historic, outdated response. To me, the response currently is Jewish pride.
Yes.
It's the journey, it's the empowerment, it's the knowledge, it's the action, it's the feeling, it's cultivating all of those things. And it takes time, but it's something we have to commit ourselves to, rebuild our people and
Yeah.
do it meaningfully. And it's, a little bit of humility wouldn't go amiss, because I always say Jewishness doesn't belong to us. We're
What do you mean?
caretakers of it we're caretakers of it for future generations. It survived for thousands of years because there have been Jews, ancient Israelites first, then Jews, who understood the value and who fought for it and who preserved it and who passed it on. That is our responsibility. It's not about having your name in a building. It's not about where you're putting your money. It's about, we are all public servants. We all must put our resources give the resources to the community. Like, I'm not wealthy, but I've got a mind and I can talk, so I do that.
Yeah.
So we have to use everything we have to promote and support Jewish continuity. And I think they are, but I
Yeah.
think it's about, it's about whether that's true or not, whether actually they're effective or not. And I think a lot of the time these people are not, these organizations are not.
Right. Well, you said when you spoke to the Jewish organization about fighting anti-Semitism, you're preaching to the choir. You're basically saying by talking to the Jews.
100%.
And your point, I'm going to rephrase it. Tell me if I understand it correctly. Your point wasn't so much, this is how you fight anti-Semitism. It's don't start there. Please start with the Jewish community first and build up this sense of Jewish pride, a Jewish identity that because you can't start to fight the outside if you are threatened on the inside and you're not strong on the inside. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you even know that you deserve better if you don't have pride? This is just the way it is. It's me. No, get a bit of self-respect.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. And it's a process, and we're not going to shame people or judge people because we understand there's a greater context and we are all trying to grapple with and navigate being a Jew in the non-Jewish world. And that's certainly not an easy thing. But when we're talking about people in positions of power, we have to also be strong and clear. We want to have empathy, but someone who runs a big organization that's not doing what it needs to be doing is not the same as, Joe Schmo down the street who is just in their house with their families in their local community. There are people who have failed and there's organizations that have failed. And at some point there needs to be an audit. Like, what did you do with the money?
Yeah.
We know the organizations that have multi-million dollar budgets. It's insane. And then what are they doing? And some of them are doing good work, and some of them are doing good work in some areas and not others, right? So it's not a blanket, it's complicated, or it's nuanced rather.
Sure.
But yeah, it always strikes me that probably if I was anti-Zionist, someone would be paying me to be preaching anti-Zionist ideas. And it's not that we need to be paid, but it needs to be possible for us to do a living. We need to have work. We need to be paid to work.
Yeah, but that requires an organization with money to recognize that they themselves are not fulfilling. They're not doing enough. Oh, so I need to outsource this.
Yeah, or an innovative individual or collection of individuals who have resources,
Yeah.
And it would have to be formalized. I've spoken to people about this. It would have to be a formalized thing, right? With contracts and guiding principles and blah, blah, like 501c3s or whatever it is. But yeah, maybe we need to sidestep the major organizations for a minute because, and it's not, again, some of them do great work and I work with a lot of them and
Yeah.
value. But there's organizations that you're like, you're just wasting enormous amounts of money and you're not making a difference. And
Right.
that is criminal when we're in crisis. It's negligent when things are fine. Things are not fine.
Yeah.
Things have changed fundamentally. The situation of Jews in the diaspora has changed fundamentally. Maybe it will revert, maybe it will evolve, but this is where we are now. And we need a global war cabinet. We need to be fighting this strategically. There's no strategy. There's no
Yeah.
strategy. It's really, and again, I want to be empathetic and understanding and, but at some point it comes to the point that's like, no, it's not good enough. We're at war.
That's it. I'm hearing you're greatly frustrated because you're passionate about this, and we should all be passionate about this. This is our well-being, the well-being of our community and our children, the future
Yeah,
generations.
yeah.
So I think I have just a few more questions. One of them is, how do you teach? Speaking about teaching our the future and all that, how do you teach our youth indigeneity? How do you do that? How do you say you come from here? When I've said this a few times to some kids over the years, and some get it, and others will go, no, 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 my grandfather's from over here, my grandfather's from Russia, that kind of thing. I'm talking about young people, young
Yeah,
Jews.
yeah. Well, firstly, two things. You have to define indigeneity.
Okay.
So it is kind of historically defined, historically meaning the last 50, 60, 70 years, defined in kind of a leftist way in the post-colonial context. So the ideas that people have of indigenous people are that they are primitive, that they're oppressed, and that they are first.
Mm.
Firstness is not really a factor. Like it's too difficult to ascertain. There are people who are classified as indigenous who are absolutely not first in a place. So we need to put that to the side. Oppression and people talk about the indigenous struggle. It's like, so what is that?
Mm.
Because you can talk about indigenous struggles, but what is the indigenous struggle? And really what that is the racism of low expectations. You're stripping people of their agency. You're saying you're a victim. So you're an indigenous person, you're a victim.
Mm.
And then primitiveness. Why can't indigenous people be sitting in a boardroom using their mobile phones and Wi-Fi? There's no reason. These are all kind of racist ideas, really. And I've discovered these or explored these notions through reading commentary from non-Jewish indigenous people. So I'm not the only one who has issues with a lot of it. So then it's about defining indigeneity. In my book, if I can recall, and this is a world preview, it's about a group's story beginning in one place.
Yeah.
So what I mean is beginning. Let's look at Italian Americans as an example. Are Italian Americans indigenous to America? No, there's a hyphen. Italian American. They came from Italy. Now then you can have a conversation about whether they're indigenous to Italy or not, right? I'm not here to make that argument. But that their story did not begin in America. It began in Italy and they were an immigrant group. The story of the Jews, as an example, began in the Levant. Jews didn't exist anywhere else in the world before 3,200 years ago in the land of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where our story began. That's where we emerged. And most importantly, there we remained rooted, either physically, spiritually, or culturally. It's our home. And we have a deep emotional connection with the territory, meaning the soil, the natural resources, and the land itself. So then you have to define indigeneity. And by the way, that was paraphrased from a very eloquent piece of writing in my book. So you can get that in February 2025. And then you have to go through what I've done in the book. And I'm a teacher. So I really use my books as educational tools. So then what I did, or what I do, is explore Jewish history. So I explore, and I say this in the book, actually, this is what you should do. Take this structure. I explore 1,300 years of Jewish history in about 4 chapters. So it's quite brief on each section, but it demonstrates the origins of the Jewish people. And the perspective I take is kind of utilizing archaeology. So I look at the Torah as the original document, the original source, and then I say, look, where can we prove it, or what does the evidence suggest? And you kind of build a story using those pieces of evidence, like a building block. Then what you do once you've told that story, like, so the real story of how we developed, and I tell it up until the diaspora was really formed, because then that's a different book.
Okay.
But the origins of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, then I have a couple of chapters, then you'd have lessons on indigeneity. What does that mean? I have utilized the United Nations 7 criteria on indigeneity, and that is what guides me. I use that along with the definition I propose, because some of them, the UN's definitions, are problematic, but I analyze them and say whether they're reasonable or not. Some of them are not. Some of them are kind of using this idea of kind of the racism of low expectations, and I analyze how they impact us. So one of them, for example, is a continuous language, culture, and belief. Language, tick, Hebrew. Culture, I chose circumcision, the Brit, and the mikvah as cultural expressions, acts. And then with beliefs, I looked at the Shema, and I also looked at the notion that God promised us the land of Israel. You know, themes that have been continuous for thousands of years. There is one of the criteria is that the group has replicated their indigenous culture. So I guess if they lose sovereignty or they're exiled, yes, we did that. We kept kosher. We still celebrated the holidays. We kept Shabbat. We lived by laws that were formed in the land of Israel, the original indigenous culture, and they still inform our world today. You know, and just because not all of us do them doesn't mean they're not Jewish laws. You know, another one would be self-identification as indigenous at the individual level and an acceptance as such by the collective. So that's a bit complicated. And indigeneity is not a term that we as Jews have used. So let's break it down a bit. So do individual Jews feel connected to Israel? Yes, they do. We have statistics that demonstrate that. There are statistics from European countries that chart whether these Jews from the diaspora feel more connected to Israel or more connected to the country of their birth or equally connected. That is a way that we can ascertain and measure the strength of feeling, right? And also there's an organization in the UK that I utilize. They measured the connection by visiting Israel. And like the vast 93% or something of Jews in Britain have visited Israel.
Wow.
So like we can say, yes, Jews feel connected at an individual level. And then let's talk about the collective. Is there a mechanism within Jewishness to regulate on who is and who is not a member? Yeah. It's the halakha. And yeah, the Orthodox and the Reform and the Liberals have different views on it, but there is law. Each of them has criteria, laws.
Right.
So that is how you educate. It's systematic. It's going through the point. It's not necessarily that sexy or fun. It's scholarly, but that's how you teach it. And what you then understand, what then unfolds before you, is an incredible story of continuity. Even our last names, Cohen, Levy, our first name. My name is Ben. Where does that come from? I know Shimon's, I know Reuben's, I know Dan's. Right. There's so much that connects us to the land. It is kind of unbelievable. And then what I see indigeneity as is a flip that you switch in your mind and you start to see everything through this lens. So my partner and I light the Shabbat candles and say Kiddush every Friday night, every Kabbalat Shabbat. And sometimes we then go to the movies and go out for dinner and, you know, get takeout, but we do that. And those are things that have been done by Jews for thousands of years. And even though I'm secular and that God is not a part of my Jewish identity, even though I live in London, even though I'm in a same-sex relationship, I am saying prayers to the Jewish national God and taking part in the indigenous religion of the Jews. It's when you break it down that way, you know, I've had lots of conversations about this, as you can imagine, and there are some people that start off skeptical, but if you have the time to really formulate it, without fail, every single conversation I've had has ended in, oh yeah, well, of course you're indigenous.
Right.
You can't dispute it. Right. There are criteria. Either the criteria can be utilized or they cannot be. And if they are, then they can also be utilized to analyze our relationship. And that's what it is. Understanding our relationship to the land. And I mean the soil. That's why Jews are buried with bags of soil from Israel, even in the diaspora. Why we kiss the ground, why we cry when we're touching down, why we clap. There's a feeling. It's a feeling. There's a feeling of being home. And it's remarkable. And it's something I wish all Jews can feel and express and experience. And we have to understand it. We have to give a name to it.
Yeah.
To me, that's indigeneity.
Thank you. This, you talk about this in your upcoming book. Am I right? That's called Jews and Indigenous People. Is that
The Jews and indigenous people.
The Jews and Indigenous People, coming out in 2025? Do you have a month or time of season?
February 27th.
February 27th. My goodness, to the day. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. You know, you're wearing this great Star of David, and till I was 8, I lived in Kinshasa in the former Zaire, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and my best friend at the time is a guy named Rom, and he has a younger brother who's now like a big musical artist named Eric Zane, and he and a couple of people came up with this song just a few months ago, maybe, called "Rock the Star."
Yeah.
And it's about Jewish pride and that rocking the star. And I think you're rocking the star in many ways, more than one.
Yeah. I
So
try to, and but I will say, I want to say, people always ask me if they should wear Jewish symbols. And the response actually might surprise you. I say, you need to choose that yourself.
yeah,
And actually, what's more important is working on maintaining the flame of Jewish pride, which is inside all of us. That's what's most important, because sometimes it isn't safe actually to wear these. I wear them. I've got chutzpah. I am like, I dare you to say, like, I like can give someone a look that's like, go on then. Like, you're looking at me, okay, come for me, let's do it. Because I mean, I have my partner there who's like 6'2", who's like my bodyguard, but I'm like, come, like, he's like, shush, stop antagonizing people. But that's my choice.
right.
But even if you choose not to, that's okay, as long as you understand why, as long as you understand it is their problem. This is a damning indictment on them. And I love my Jewishness. I feel proud of my Jewishness, but it might not be safe.
Right.
And that's also okay. But if you do feel safe, absolutely, because one of the most incredible things post October 7th that I've experienced has been the communication between Jews, or the recognition between Jews, just when I'm out. When I'm on the tube, when I'm out in the street. I was in New York a week after October 7th, and I was walking down the street and wearing a kippah, and someone said, Am Yisrael Chai. It made me want to cry.
Yeah.
Like, it was this feeling. And, you know, we've spoken for a while, but one thing I want to say before we end is we are so damn lucky. As Jews, we have an innate sense of belonging. We belong to a family. We belong to a place. Do you know how many people would kill for that sense of belonging? How many people work so hard? As a gay person, that's what you do when you come out. You work for a sense of belonging. We're born with it. So it's about utilizing it. But yeah, I mean, having communication and the acknowledgement of other Jews when you're out feels like you're part of the resistance, and it feels like you're in this family. It's an expression of that, a recognition of it.
Nice. You know, Ben, a lot of people who are teachers and writers and clergy in the Jewish community, I think you are a visionary. You have a vision. And I urge all my viewers watching this podcast at any point, whether it's the second it comes out or months later, I urge my viewers to follow Ben M. Freeman on social media and to order his books today, all of them, except the third one. Order that one on February 27th. February 27th. I also encourage organizations across the US and Canada and elsewhere to find a way to bring Ben to your community. I think we can all benefit from listening to what he has to say. I think our youth can benefit. I think our leaders can benefit. Ben brings insights on Jewish identity and his ongoing efforts to educate, inspire, and empower both Jewish and non-Jewish communities worldwide. Makes it all worth hearing from Ben. Ben, thank you so very much for being my guest on Proudly Jewish.
Thank you for having me.